Good afternoon and welcome to the Travel Perspective sessions at World Travel Market. Travel Perspective is a social and digital consultancy working with travel companies and tourism organisations to help them share their amazing stories digitally, work collaboratively with travel influencers through video, images and words, and drive new business. I've been running sessions with Travel Perspective at World Travel Market for quite a long time now, since 2010, and we've seen huge changes in that time. And I know that you're here to find out what next. We've, as Travel Perspective, we've talked very many times over the past 13 years about over-tourism and how there are very few unspoilt places left. But what about if I were to tell you that there's a place just 60 miles or so away that's largely unspoilt and only 500 people or so have ever been there? The catch? At the moment, it's likely to cost you at least $250,000 to get there. We'd have to count Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or Sir Richard Branson among your close friends to get there. Luckily, my guest here today is one of the latter, and we're going to talk about this unspoilt destination. Now, that amazing place is space. And ever since humans have looked up into the skies and have dreamed what it would be like in space, the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke and the director Stanley Kubrick imagined what that would be in 2001: A Space Odyssey. They thought there would be orbiting Hilton hotels by the turn of the millennium. We're not at that point yet. Now, I'm delighted to be joined today by one of the people who's been heavily involved in trying to make space tourism a reality. Could you join me in welcoming Will Whitehorn to the stage?
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for joining us today, Will. So, Will is really well placed to talk about space tourism. On the tourism side, he's worked for Thomas Cook. He ran PR for the Virgin Group and was a director of its rail group until 2004, when you were named president of Virgin Galactic, Sir Richard Branson's commercial space tourism venture. Will has been president of the UKSpace Trade Association, is chair of the world's first listed space technology investment fund, Seraphim Space Investment, and is a director of AC Clyde Space AB, and he's also part of the British government's Space Advisory Panel, which sounds very exciting. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that later on. So let's get down to business. Now, before I was a journalist, I think I told you this, Will, I was actually a space scientist. I know it's an unusual route to go, career choice from space scientist to travel journalist, but I'm desperate to know the answer to this question. Is mass space tourism ever going to be realistic because of the high costs of getting into space?
I think there is something going on at the moment that some of you may have noticed just watching the TV news from time to time, or blogging, or in social media, and that is the amount of space launch going on is rocketing. Many more satellites have been launched in the last year than in the whole history of the previous 20 years. And in that 20 years, more were launched than in the previous 40 years. So we've reached an economic takeoff for space satellite launch. And one of the reasons for that is three companies. Jeff Bezos' company, Blue Origin, the Virgin company, Virgin Orbit, and the sister company, Virgin Galactic, and Elon Musk. And of those three, Elon Musk is the most important technologically. Then Virgin Orbit, then Jeff Bezos. Now, what's going on out there right now is an industrial revolution. And in all industrial revolutions, tourism and the transporting of people has been at the heart of them. Be it the railway boom of the 1820s and 30s. The railways were originally built to carry coal. Within 6 months of doing that, they were carrying people rather than coal, and the coal was back on the canals because they were more profitable. And one of the reasons that these three entrepreneurs have developed their satellite and space launch businesses, which are revolutionising the industry, is also to do a little bit of tourism. But I don't think the tourism into space will become mass tourism. But I think what will happen is hypersonics, the other technology being developed at the same time, which is skidding around the edge of space, are going to lead to a revolution in very fast travel around the planet. So we'll have very fast travel around the planet, a smaller number of space tourists, new types of very high altitude supersonic planes that don't damage the atmosphere so much, of which are being developed now, with about 5 different companies have raised substantial sums to do that. And then a number of people who go to space to experience weightlessness, the curvature of the Earth, and the beauty of the Gaia, as Professor James Lovelock called it, of our blue planet. It's definitely happening. Virgin has got 3 spaceships in final construction based on the prototype that Sir Richard flew in last year, and those will all be commercially ready and certified by next summer, autumn, and they'll be carrying lots of people. Jeff Bezos is already underway with his carriage of people at the moment, and Elon Musk's larger, more substantial Starliner project is reaching the stage of test flight right now, and that will allow a large number of people to go to space in an orbit, or a small number of people to go all the way to Mars. These things are definitely going to happen because space is becoming so important to our economy, and space is the only way that we're going to get to net zero with a population of 9 billion people.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned net zero. We'll come back onto that later on. Now, I know for many, I mean, it's been a long-term project for Sir Richard and Virgin, and the price tag for people to sign up in advance was something like $250,000, wasn't it, for forever? And but you know, that's going to price most mass tourism out of the market. I mean, when you were there, did you talk about that pricing and where you saw that going? Yeah,
interestingly enough, when we did the market research on Virgin Galactic, we gave the business 3 or 4 different lines of business, one of which is space science, being able to do microgravity and actually take a scientist up rather than use a sounding rocket with a high risk of failure of the experiment. So it's capable of doing that work, and NASA has already given them contracts. They've carried up equipment and test equipment for NASA. The other line of business that it has, in addition to that, is training of astronauts. It's actually cheaper to do this than send them on vomit comets and down into the depths of the sea to try and use spacesuits. So giving them training in space in real weightlessness. And then the other line is space tourism. And NASA themselves calculated back in about 2004, just before we launched Virgin Galactic, they did some research. They calculated that up to 100,000 people could afford a price tag of then $200,000 at that time, and would definitely want to do it as well. And that's the market that the space tourism part's addressing. Then in Virgin's case, we also did a lot of work on how to use a single stage aircraft to launch a satellite into space. And that was the sister business, Virgin Orbit, which uses a new technology rocket fired from a 747, which they did have a picture up earlier, and you'll see a picture in a sec of it. That system is going to be launching its first UK satellites from Cornwall in only 8 days' time, which is very exciting. So all of these new technologies, hypersonics, high altitude supersonic aircraft which don't make a sonic boom anymore because they've designed that out, they make a supersonic smudge in the sky. And actual space tourism using suborbital spaceflight will all, I think, be successful. And they're all actually, from the point of view of carbon, the space tourism is almost irrelevant. The other two are actually going to be better than what we currently do lower down in the atmosphere, at what's called the troposphere. And as far as space all told is concerned, the industrial revolution that's going on now is largely about putting industries in space which are going to be too expensive to operate because of the need to get to net zero. And the first ones have already launched. That's Starlink and OneWeb. That's space-enabled broadband. The next stage is to put entire server farms up there on a bigger scale. And the final stage of this, and the UK government has just funded a project which I'm involved in the periphery of, to actually produce solar power from space and send it down to the planet Earth. Now that will then give people who go up on space tourism lots more things to look at, because solar farms in space will be huge, and they'll be microwaving power down to areas which are basically offshore wind farms. They'll then put up additional antenna in the offshore wind farms and send that ashore. So a huge amount's happening and about to happen. And the other thing for people in the tourism industry, which is going to be really quite exciting, is how you'll be able to use space technology much more simply. The data of space is about to become something that any company can largely access. So if you want to know where your tourists are on an island, say, you'll be able to give them tags to where to go out, and somebody in the office can look on a screen and make sure they're all right. That is going to be feasible within 24 months of today. That constellation is already going into place and will start to be commercially marketed. Basically using Bluetooth technology with space enabling. So these things are happening very quickly. When it comes to the flora and fauna, it is already a satellite that our company built, which allows, for instance, on an island in the Pacific, and I'm not going to say where because they're using the technology to good effect, they can spot if illegal fishing folk from Asia have come across to fish for sharks. And as you know, they cut the fins off, take them back, and obviously are destroying the very nature of the ecotourism of that island. Well, they now have a satellite every 90 minutes that can spot the fishing boats even when they turn off their transponders, and only one patrol boat is needed to now go out and find them. All of these technologies, some of which are eco-related because they're a result of COP26 that these companies have got their government funding, are going to be usable in tourism as well. So you'll be able to do lots and lots of things, and that will all become available in 3 years. So there's whole different strands, I think, for the tourism industry. The space tourism itself happening, there's rapid round the planet movement within 5 to 6 years, and there's going to be the use of space technology in the tourism industry, and particularly eco-tourism.
So, I mean, just sort of going back a little bit to that point, I mean, you said that $200,000 there. Do you think it will ever come down from that? Because, as an astrophysicist by training, I know how much energy that takes to get you up to that level. So, is it ever going to be cheaper than that? Is it going to be the sort of, easy jet of space tourism? Are we going to have those?
Well, I know that the business plan of companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin is to eventually price down after it's gone up. So if you look at the history of tourism and travel generally, let's take a specific example. March 1939, the first ever Pan Am Clipper flying boat. The 35 people who got on that were the space tourists of their day. The first non-stop flights across the North Atlantic, where the engineers crawled out inside the wing to maintain the Pratt & Whitney engines. Those flying boats in March 1939, the average ticket price was in today's money about $150,000. Therefore, you can extrapolate from that what could happen. Because there were only a very small number of those original Pan Am and Empire, the British equivalent was the Empire flying boat it was called, and there were only a small number of those at that time able to do these distances in relative comfort and safety. And what's going to happen to space tourism is, as the experience grows, the comfort and safety factor, the more use of the technology will bring the prices down. But I don't think you'll see it at much less. The current price for these tickets is about $350,000 to $400,000. So I don't think that will come down for a while, but I think eventually it will. But I think the new generation of hypersonics, where you'll get a space experience in a hypersonic flight, you can imagine what that's going to... I mean, it's a bit like being in a very high U2, or it'll be over twice the height of Concorde. And in Concorde you can see the curvature of the Earth. So there'll be semi-space experiences, and at much lower cost than this. As I say, there are the developments are literally being built now for the first time since kind of false dawn post-Concorde that this would happen. What's now happening is it's composite technology, AI technology, and microchip technology have all come together to allow one to do these things in a way that wasn't possible before.
I was going to ask you about that sort of whole Concorde thing because, back in the 70s and 80s, there was a market for that. There were the well-heeled business travelers and their companies who would pay for you to arrive in New York after 3 hours rather than waiting 6 or 7 hours. And I mean, do you think that's changed now? I mean, we've lived through a pandemic where everybody's jumped on Zoom and not doing that anymore. Is there going to be a market for that hypersonic travel that pays that? That people are willing to pay those extra fares to get there sooner?
The research says there is, and who am I to argue with research? I mean, I personally believe there is as well. Well, there will always be a market for taking you as a real human being to another place in another, it's rather like Star Wars and Star Trek themselves. People dream of being in a galaxy far, far away. Well, especially on a day like this in London, you can dream of being on a continent far, far away when the weather's like this. And I think that, if you could get to New York in 30 minutes and Australia in an hour and a half, I think there is a market for that. And I think it's in the hundreds of thousands of people. And if the cost of it was more comparable to Concorde than to that Virgin Galactic flight, there's definitely going to be a big market. Because there is a market even for going to space. I mean, people want to experience what's happening. And I think one of the things that people don't understand at the moment is I think we don't educate humanity about space very well. What we do is we tend to result in a situation whereby people think that space is for scientists, a couple of rich billionaires, and the satellites they watch telly through and things like that. They don't really understand that this full-scale industrialization is underway, and that literally without space we definitely cannot get to net zero. I mean, even the oldest system that you'll all know about, the GPS system, that's already saved billions of tons of carbon dioxide by making it more efficient to transport goods around the world, making food tagged. We produce 12% more food that gets to our plates in the world now simply because of that old GPS system, of it not spoiling in ports in the way it did. So just that old mid-90s thing that was unlocked and most people associate with their car sat-nav and their phone sat-nav, just that system alone has radically changed our ability to use space industrially. And what's coming around the corner is simply dramatic in comparison to the old GPS system. I mean, we've invested in our investment trust in companies, Tyrannus is one. This is a new investment of ours. It's able to spot down to 3 millimeters the changes in the cell structure of leaves in a field for farmers, knowing if a disease is developing. Now imagine the use that can be made of that in tourism. If you knew that soon that there was a disease being in an area, then you would make sure that you eradicated it in that area. These kind of simple, not to us simple, but simple from the point of view of marrying good AI technology, the new hyperspectral cameras, the new radar that's now appearing in ICEYE, another company we invest in, has space-enabled AI radar, and that allows it to spot numerous things, from climate change issues right the way through to, in Ukraine, the sad dead bodies on the street of a city. So this is the kind of huge technological leap that's happening right now, and the media, I don't think, has yet caught up with it. Science is starting to, and that's why governments are now producing much more in-depth space policies. Every country, from Canada to Japan to the United States, is introducing larger scale space budgets for government spending, and that's happening because the realization of how important this is on the way. And it'll affect every industry on the ground because of the things people can do.
I was going to talk about those investments. I mean, have you had any approaches from tourism or travel type industries or related industries who want investment?
No, we haven't. No, Seraphim, the company we've started, only invests in space tech itself. So we've not invested in the space tourism businesses, the likes of Virgin Galactic or Virgin Orbit or Blue Origin or Elon Musk SpaceX. For a start, they've got plenty of investment, number one. Secondly, we're investing in the stuff that goes into space to do the jobs. Now, some of the companies we're working with are already working with one or two of the tourism authorities around the world to look at how they're going to be able to manage their assets better. These Bluetooth-enabled tagging, for example, is going to be really useful in tourism because you're giving people things like bicycles, cars, you're renting them out, they're going to difficult places on islands. People are much more adventurous in their travel now. Being able to tag those experiences and be able to see them is going to make insurance cheaper and going to improve the health and safety of tourism at the more extreme end of it particularly.
You're a good friend of Sir Richard, and I believe you went to his summer party this year. But
actually, when I last spoke to you, I was on my way to his summer party on one of the Virgin cruise ships, and I got COVID. So sadly, that was the one I missed.
But have you spoken to him about his experience when he took that flight?
Yes, I have. And it was Sir Richard Branson flew on the Virgin Galactic spaceship about 18 months ago. And it was the last flight before they then completed the construction of the 3 commercial ones that will take people up, using all the learnings from that entire program over a decade. And he just said to me, he said, I remember when I spoke to Buzz Aldrin when we started this project, the three of us were all in Morocco. So I was in Morocco with Buzz Aldrin and Richard Branson in the Mamounia, I think it was, in Marrakesh, lovely hotel. And we were talking about the idea of developing space concepts based on new technology, such as composite materials, air launching, all the things NASA hadn't really got into to any great extent. And Buzz said, you know, if you could give people this experience, it will change their view of the world. He said, all of us who came back from all the space missions that have been done, who all know each other, all are changed by seeing the curvature of the Earth, realizing how small the planet is, and making you realize how delicate that little area of atmosphere is, and how this vastness up above it could be used for so many things and isn't. We're not doing anything up here apart from running a space station around, doing some experiments and doing some communication satellites. He said we could really, I remember him saying, no, we could really industrialize up here and get rid of all the problems, you know, and take them out of the atmosphere, as Professor James Lovelock had predicted we should do. And he said, and I'm a changed person and you'll be like that. And the funny thing is, I'd completely forgotten that conversation. Richard came back and we were speaking on the phone. He said, it was just like Buzz said it would be. He said, I'm completely changed. He said, I just see everything in a slightly different perspective. And space tourism for me is worth it if it just does that. But it's mainly worth it for me as an individual because I want to see us industrialise in space to save the planet.
Yeah, and it's actually what William Shatner said, wasn't it, when he went on the New Shepherds?
Oh, you know, I didn't see what he.
Yeah, so he said he was, you know, it changed him, but he actually felt very sad when he came back, and that's Captain James C. Kirk, for those who don't know that. He came back a changed person as well, and you know, that's what we do when we travel and go to places. We're looking for new experiences to change us rather than sitting at home and living our normal lives, and to inspire us. So hopefully that's what it will do.
And you know, if you read the descriptions by the very first people who went on trains, which were open carriages, and they were going faster than any human being had ever gone in an open carriage, and doctors had predicted that the air would squash into their lungs and blow them up. These very first people who went on trains in the 1820s, it changed them because they realised possibilities nobody had ever thought of. When they saw the world go past that fast, they thought, have those things disappeared? You know, perceptually, we've now learned to live with that. But the fact is, in those days they hadn't, and they didn't have television to show them what it might look like. And that happened with the first people who flew, the Montgolfier brothers. It changed their perception. They could see, because of the heights they went to, even with some of the early balloons, that the Earth had some curvature to it, and it wasn't flat. That's definitely true. We know it's not flat. That's great. So my belief is that every experience you have changes you, and an experience like this will help change humanity.
I was going to ask you, if it's not a personal question, do you have a ticket yourself? I mean, you don't have to tell us how much you paid for it. You get a staff discount.
I didn't pay for it. So when I left Virgin at the end of 2010, I was given a ticket by Sir Richard. And funnily enough, a lady phoned me from Virgin Galactic last week who wanted my memory about some of the people they were trying to put on the manifest. So I said, well, am I on the manifest? And she said, oh, were you supposed to be? I said, yeah. I said, but I'm not going in the first couple of hundred. So I think I am on the manifest at about number 350 to go up. That'll be in about a year and a half's time. And I did do, some years ago, all the training for it. So I've been in the centrifuge, the one in Farnborough that was in the James Bond movie all those decades ago. I've been on a Vomit Comet and done a high altitude parabola, in fact over Cornwall in an Alpha Jet it's called. And I've done the various other bits and pieces, but nothing is going to replicate the experience of actually doing it. So I'm very excited about it.
So you mentioned there that you know, that might be a year and a half away. I mean, how frequently is this going to happen once it's commercialised?
It's going to be weekly. Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to be taking something that, you know, if they had a space launch in the old days once a year of a human carrying spaceship, which would usually be the shuttle, that was frequent. Then it got down to every 3 or 4 months. But the shuttle was, each shuttle flight cost $2 billion, and it cost nearly $30 billion to develop. Because it was the way it was developed with 300,000 moving miles. These technologies are much simpler. And even Elon Musk sophisticated starship. It still has fewer moving parts than the shuttle system had. So that simplicity is what is making this work. Simplicity combined with the advanced AI technologies of being able to do robotics in space are also going to mean that we'll have space hotels. That's something we haven't mentioned yet, so I'll briefly touch on that. NASA let a very exciting contract in the last 3 months. There was a contract for the private sector to bid to build the next International Space Station, to be ready by 2030. Now the International Space Station, you've all seen pictures of it, it's huge. It's nearly the length of the 747 that you saw in the picture the other day, and it's got lots of solar panels coming out from it, which power it. Now it was built by taking all those bits up on the space shuttle originally, a bit at a time, and it took 10 years to build it. What they're now looking at, these new high-tech companies that are bidding for the contracts, is technology which basically you can inflate a Kevlar-like material in space. And of course the pressure inside keeps it very rigid. Now, as you will also imagine, Mark, it's much safer from the point of view of debris going in it, because it was self-sealed. So these new technology companies are going to bid for the NASA contract with an inflatable spaceship, which can also be a space hotel. And then you'll be able to take people up, and they'll be able to spend a few days up there. They'll be able to participate in the science. So I think you will get companies that eventually do kind of like the Hurtigruten does in Norway, where they take science, and like they do on some of the adventures down to the Antarctic, where you actually participate in a science project that's going on. And I think that you will get that kind of space tourism also developing, where people stay up there for a while, but at much lower cost than we've seen with those people who've gone to the International Space Station, where they have spent up to $60 million to go there for that very advanced space. It isn't really tourism, because you had to learn to speak Russian to go there, you had to qualify as a scientist fully, and you had to also do an advanced astronaut training to live in space for the 3 months. This will be different to that. This will be somewhere beyond the space tourism we talked about, and somewhere towards the kind of experience you mentioned at the beginning with 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, so will we see the likes of Hilton and Marriott bidding for that contract, do you think, or is it going to be much more specialised than that?
Well, I think this is where you might again find the Bezos, Branson, Musk approach. Elon hasn't said if he's interested in doing it. The companies that are developing the technology in this NASA contract scenario aren't necessarily the people who operate them. But someone will come in with a niche. Now, whether it's an existing global brand in hotelling or not, I do not know. But I should think you'll find Virgin bidding for the operator's contract on it, I'd imagine. It'll be the sort of thing they would do.
We talked about net zero there, and I don't know if you saw this report earlier this week or last week, the 2022 World Inequality Report. It said an 11-minute space flight emits no fewer than 75 tonnes of carbon per passenger if you include indirect emissions, and maybe up to 1,000 tonnes if you do include absolutely everything. But at the other end of the scale, there are 1 billion people on the planet who emit less than 1 tonne of carbon per person per year. So over their lifetime, that's going to be even less than that one single space flight. Do you think we should be even thinking about space tourism? Tourism, I'm talking about here, not the other elements of space.
Well, that's the rub of it all. You've made a very good point. But that report last week didn't talk about the 1,700,000,000,000 tonnes of coal emissions and the increase in those, so that the coal emissions currently in parts of the world which have increased in the past 2 years and are not decreasing are responsible for such a vastly greater amount of carbon than we are looking at in either of the 2 other scenarios. I mean, if those 2 or 3 billionaires going into space and taking a few people into space has enhanced the ability to get the technology into space to help save the planet, I think it's worth it. I think that, though, is the reason there'll never be the kind of space tourism that we might have imagined decades ago, because I think the emissions will become a bigger issue. Now, the emissions in space tourism can be sorted by blue hydrogen or green hydrogen combined with oxygen and new generation of rocket motors. And This is one of the things that's fascinating about space, and when I was talking about solar power from space and renewables generally, there is a knock-on effect from renewables that could save the travel industry. And I mean save the transportation part of it. And it's something that I worked on with the Royal Air Force when I was on the board, and they've just won a Guinness Book of Records world record for the first ever carbon zero flight by an aircraft. And that's this: if you can produce enough renewable energy, there'll be times of the day, and this will happen in Britain by 2030, and in America a little bit later, and in one or two other countries around the same time. There'll be times of the day and the week where you've basically got free energy that can't be used. And that's energy that would go to waste, unless you store it in a battery. And the other way of storing it is the Fischer-Tropsch process, which you might remember from the science, younger days of learning at university. Fischer and Tropsch were two Germans in the 1920s who developed a way to make basically petrol or paraffin, which was completely clean because it had none of the other minerals and things in it that you get with oil from the ground, and it would burn completely cleanly. But it was the actual equivalent of those two things in terms of the long chain hydrocarbon. They learned a way to produce it taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and water. But it needed huge amounts of electricity from burning coal to make it. The Fischer-Tropsch process has just come back to life because of the knowledge that to get to net zero, we've got to also think of ways of using hydrocarbons that are net zero hydrocarbons, because we can never replace them in certain types of aircraft and transportation. It'll be very difficult to ever replace them with solar powered planes, electrically powered planes, and hydrogen powered planes themselves there's a big problem with hydrogen powered planes, you can imagine. Hydrogen's highly explosive. So to be able to use kerosene, or paraffin as we call it in Britain, to be able to use kerosene that's net zero will be important. If we can develop that Fischer-Tropsch technology again, which again, there is investment going into it, a lot of the problems of the travel industry and the transportation side will be solved. Because, making these comparisons of that 11 tons of concrete, of carbon dioxide, 1 ton, between poverty and wealth, is a valid comparison. But if we simply stop doing these things right now because of it, we can never get to net zero. Because the things we need to do in space we won't be able to do. And if we can produce solar power from space, it will be a far better way to produce it than on the ground, because it can give us 24/7 renewable energy. But the only way we can really do that in the Earth's atmosphere is nuclear. Whereas, of course, solar power from space is in fact nuclear. It's just a fusion reaction being microwaved down to the planet and collected, and I think in a more efficient way. And if we can do that, then we can make net zero fuel, the travel industry will work into the future, and humanity is saved. That sounds relatively simplistic from a highly complex subject, but I'm not a believer that we'll ever get to it otherwise.
Well, I have some more questions for you in a moment, Will, but I just wanted to turn to the audience. I don't know if we've got the roving microphones anyway. Yes, we do, but first of all, I want to have a show of hands. How many people would like to go on holiday in space? Okay, so would you pay, keep them up, sorry. Would you pay £500 for that? Put it down if not.
£500?
Yeah, I'm just starting. How about 1,000? Yeah, still going. 5,000? Oh, still doing well. 10,000? Oh. There you are, we're getting to the pricing point there. How about the 200,000 that we were just talking about? Okay, oh yeah. Fantastic, so one person would pay 200,000. That's an interesting show of hands there, I think. I just wondered if, it's great to have Will here. He is so knowledgeable about this sector. I'm sure there are questions that you'd like to ask him before I continue with my grilling of him. But anyone got a question they want to ask now? Put your hand up. A couple over here.
I was listening very intently to the discussion until you brought up this topic of all the tests that you have to do and the kind of feeling sick before that, and then I was like, I'm not sure if I want to do that. Do you ever think that the price was something that you focused a lot about? Do you also think that it will be easier physically to get up into space, or do you think that everybody will have to do the kind of training that you'll have to do?
Well, in direct order, the easiest of the three systems is the Virgin Galactic system. You only put about 3G, and you're going up on an aircraft, then you're flying into space. Of the existing space tourism system that's operating the Jeff Bezos one, it's a bit harder, because you come down on a parachute, and you've gone up with rockets, you pull more Gs. So the hardest way to go is the way that NASA's always done it, ground-based rocketry and, you know, getting into orbit. So Elon Musk's system that goes to the International Space Station is the one you need the most physical health and training for. The Virgin Galactic one, funnily enough, the older you are, and as long as you've not got an illness as such, like a heart disease, as long as you're on medication if you have any problem like that, it's the easiest system of all. And going into space is easier the older you are, because your arteries are harder, they're narrower, and you don't get the rush of blood to the head from G-forces so much. Which is why when these old astronauts went up again, they felt absolutely fine, and some of the younger people would be sick from time to time. But all of our astronauts, when I was at Virgin Galactic, all the astronauts did the training and nobody got sick. They all went, they pulled the same number of Gs, and the oldest of them was, sadly he's passed away now, and that was Professor James Lovelock. He was going to travel on Virgin Galactic, but he died just this year, in fact, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he had no problem with the Gs at all, and that was when he was 90-something.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So, another question just here. I don't think we can hear you. I don't know if that one's on.
Is it working? Okay, thank you. My name is Jose, I'm from the south of Spain, and I work in a travel agency specializing on stargazing tour and activities. So you can imagine that I'm more than interested in faith, more than agree. But you said something that worried to me, that you said something about saving the planet by industrializing the space. But are we going to do that by destroying the beauty and the cultural value of the night sky? Because maybe this is not a problem here in London where you can see the star. But I live in a rural area and my daily landscape is the Milky Way, and I don't want to lose that. So I'm agree we must do that, but I'm just asking if you are thinking about any solution.
That's an excellent question. And it's something that's caused me personal concern, because like you, I like looking at the night sky. I'm sure we both do. There is a big issue when we get to the level of satellite deployment. We've already seen it with Starlink, one particular satellite operator. However, Starlink have now realised the error of their ways, and the next generation of satellites they produce won't produce. Basically, that was the sun bouncing off the satellites. You can design satellites that don't do that, and you can design them much more effectively to not do that, and that's now going to happen. However, solar power from space, you will see above where it is some reflection, and I think it will be something that we'll have to pay the price of doing, because you won't see it, you know, it won't destroy the night sky over Spain, but it might destroy a little bit of night sky from a bright spot where you're actually microwaving the power down. You won't see the rays, it won't be like some sort of, you know, space laser coming down. It will be, it's microwave radiation. It's like what you produce in a microwave cooker. And that microwave radiation is invisible. But you might see some of the solar panels some of the time, because they might have some reflectivity.
And you might be able to get a suntan at those locations as well.
I did get those locations
that as well.
Who gets a suntan? At night.
Anybody else? There's a question at the front here.
First of all, let me say thank you very much to you both, because the subject is extremely interesting and you're very knowledgeable. So first, my recommendation is to you. Absolutely fantastic to listen to you. I'm the managing editor of a magazine called Hotel Report, and I would like to feed on the following. People travel for what they want to see and experience where they're going. You mentioned about the curvature of the Earth and stuff like this. But what are the things that you think people will want to experience by traveling to space?
Yeah, well, we largely know the answer to that from the work that's been done by companies like Bezos' company and Virgin Galactic and that early NASA survey from the early 2000s. People assume that what they really want to experience more than anything else, to send a picture down or a short video down on their social media, is weightlessness. That's the number one thing that people want to experience, because they think the grandchildren will want to see a picture of them floating upside down, because that's what they associate with being in space in a capsule. And certainly the pictures from Virgin Galactic, which has been specially designed to let you do that, where you can really experience true weightlessness in their cabin, have definitely been the things that people have responded to the most. Now, the reason for that is simply, I think, the perception of our history of watching space travel. The other thing they all mention is this curvature of the Earth and wanting to see, particularly when they start operating from different places. So there'll be likely flights from the UK in the future, so you'll get to see the UK as a whole on that curvature of the Earth if you're there. If you're in New Mexico, you'll get to see the whole Californian vistas and the Sierras and down to Baja. And if you're in Saudi Arabia, you'll get to see the peninsula, because you're not seeing, in a space tourism craft, you're not seeing the whole Earth from a long way back. You'll be able to see good detail on the continents and the planet. The other thing people really talk about experiencing is actually watching other things in motion. One of the little experiments they've done is where you take a globule of water and you can see it floating, and you can capture it in your mouth and swallow it. And that sensation, because when you swallow water in 0G, now I've not done this yet, but when you swallow water in 0G, it's a completely different experience. It kind of just filters in your body, and you can feel yourself having to pump it down in a way you don't do in gravity. So those are the kind of things people will experience. But they'll also see this thing that Mark mentioned at the very beginning. Space is no further away than the city of Birmingham is from London, basically. Not very far, in other words. But it's blooming hard to get there. And getting there, what you finally see is exactly the delineation of the atmosphere at its top point, where it becomes basically, it doesn't thin out, you do almost see a point, a very sharp delineation of what looks like atmosphere and isn't. And if we can get people to understand that everything we do currently is in that, and everything we do just adds to it, it's like a sealed petri dish. And the only way you ever really understand that is seeing it, and exactly the height of space tourism is the height where you clearly see it. When you're way out from the planet, you don't. That was something actually that Buzz Aldrin had mentioned to Richard, that they got that feeling when he went on I think he did go on a shuttle flight. He said, you see that on a shuttle flight, you never saw it on the Apollos. Because the first time you look back and see the Earth, because you've got to get up in space, you're way a long way from it. So those are the kind of things people want to experience, I think.
We've just got a couple of minutes left. I just had a couple of quick questions. I know you've obviously been involved in UK's space policy. There are 8 proposed spaceports in the UK already, including Sutherland and Shetlands, I think. But do we need that many? And shouldn't we be building one at Heathrow?
Definitely don't want to build one at Heathrow. A spaceport, to my mind, is mainly for taking satellites up. So there will definitely be a spaceport in Cornwall. And we are seeing a launch. I don't know if you can pull up the picture. Can you get rid of me for a sec and pull up the picture of the Virgin Orbit system, which was in behind where I am now? I don't know if you can do that, can you? There was going to be a launch in Cornwall in 10 days, as I said, and that's by a system that launches from the ground. That's the Virgin Orbit system there. That's going to be launching 10 satellites from Cornwall. And they've already done a lot of launches in America with Virgin Orbit. That's an old Virgin Atlantic 747 that the company bought off Virgin Atlantic and spent $50 million converting to be able to launch satellites. So that gets rid of the entire first stage of a rocket, which is the most damaging to the planet. And systems like that be able to launch from Cornwall, so Virgin Galactic. However, if you're Jeff Bezos, you want a horizontal launch. So I think there'll be 2 spaceports in the UK, and only 2. There'll be one for horizontal launch, one will emerge between Sutherland and Shetland. Certainly if you were Jeff Bezos launching from Sutherland or Shetland, you'd get a great view of that whole fantastic northern European, from Ireland across to the north of Scotland to Norway. And from the horizontal launch in Cornwall, you can go out to the sea if you're Virgin Galactic and safely launch over the sea. Remember, at Heathrow, you do not want to have something going along the runway with several tons of rocket fuel in it. And the beauty of Cornwall is you've not got an airport that's carrying many commercial flights, so in between you can clear it to do this. So Heathrow will never be a home for space launch, even if it's horizontal. But Cornwall is a very good one, because you've got all that clear airspace that isn't much used just off the coast. And also, the aircraft can go to different, as you'll know from your experience in space science, you want to have different places to launch to get into different orbits. So that's an ideal vehicle for that. But Sutherland and Shetland are an ideal place to get into a polar insertion, as it's called, or a polar orbit.
So I just have one last question, because we've literally run out of time here. Now that you've left Virgin, can you spill the beans and tell us who's actually bought a ticket?
Who has actually bought a ticket?
Yes.
Oh, there were some very famous people who bought tickets who the names were known. There was the Dallas star, Victoria Principal, was one of the people who bought a ticket. Sarah Brightman, who was the opera singer who first did Phantom of the Opera. She's been fascinated by space. She bought a ticket. There were lots of people who had some interest in space one way or another that was very direct. William Shatner asked for a free ticket. So we weren't prepared to do that this time. So he's gone with Jeff Bezos, who has given him a free ticket more recently. I think the list of people is now about 600 long, and Leonardo DiCaprio was one of them as well on the list that I remember from my time there, who became public. The ones who've said their names couldn't be used, my lips were sealed.
Well, thank you for spilling the beans on that and for all your experience of space, Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit. Fortunately, that's all we have time for. I'm sure you'd stay behind to answer a few questions if there are any from the audience. But do join me in thanking Will Whitehorn. Thank you very much.